The Friday afternoon session starts with a song about going to the convention for some reason, then jumps to the Jehovah's Witness pretending to be persecuted, which somehow turns into how people with disabilities spend their time indoctrinating themselves and others. And finally, we end with a self-congratulatory video made by Bethelites about being a Bethelite. And after that perfect collection of what is like being a Jehovah's Witness, we can finally start the convention with a boring speech about how you can't really read it in the Bible, but if you play pretend, Jesus was pretty patient.
Jesus himself was moved to become patient. But after the rebellion in Eden, Jesus would learn to show patience in new ways. How so? Well, can you imagine how Jesus must have felt as he heard the devil slander his Father in the Garden of Eden? Or when he saw the earth fill with violence in the days of Noah? Or when he watched what Satan did to the righteous man Job and his innocent children? Now keep in mind, Jesus was not a powerless creature. The Bible speaks of him as Michael, the archangel, one of the foremost princes. And not only that, but at some point, Jesus knew that he had received the assignment to come to the earth to break up the works of the devil. So imagine, Jesus has the desire, the power, and the assignment to break up the works of the devil. But it wasn't Jehovah's time. So what would Jesus do? In imitation of his Father, Jesus decided to wait.
None of what this guy said is in the Bible. This train of thought that leads to Jesus deciding to wait is nowhere in the biblical narrative, and neither is Michael the archangel being Jesus. The Jehovah's Witnesses are among the very few people who believe that Michael was Jesus because their theology comes from the other only people who believe the same, the Seventh-day Adventist. Pastor Russell followed the Seventh-day Adventist theology, and some of their beliefs can still be seen in their interpretation of prophecy. Russell started the religion saying that Michael and Jesus were the same person, and this has worked out wonderfully for Jehovah's Witnesses, who believe there are basically only two kinds of divine creatures, God and the angels. Although the Bible describes Jesus either as God or at least a God, Jehovah's Witnesses diminish that divinity by saying he was only an archangel, an angel with extra responsibilities, which both diminishes the divinity of Jesus and lets them pretend that Jesus is in the Old Testament. And it's also why most Christian religions don't consider the Jehovah's Witnesses an actual Christian religion, because they consider him an angel instead of a divine creature. Unfortunately, just like the rest of their doctrine, this too falls apart as soon as you start researching or even reading the Bible with an open mind.
What's interesting, however, is he did not decide to stop working. In fact, whenever we see Michael in the scriptures, we find him actively supporting Jehovah's sovereignty. The lesson? Waiting does not mean doing nothing. Instead, showing patience means doing everything we can to support Jehovah's sovereignty while waiting on Jehovah's time.
Again, this is nowhere in the biblical narrative. This notion that Jesus or Michael were patiently waiting for Jehovah to make things right is absolutely absent from the Bible, but it works very well to remind Jehovah's Witnesses to get on that hamster wheel. After all, what's most important for a Jehovah's Witness is to be busy in religious work because that keeps them from wondering why the end hasn't come yet. And now the speaker is going to twist the Bible yet again to try and make it seem like that time that the devil tempted Jesus 3 times was also about patience.
How did Jesus respond? In each of these 3 cases, Jesus responded with patience. Why? Because Jesus trusts his Father. Jesus didn't turn stones into loaves of bread because he knew his Father can sustain life with just a word. And Jesus trusted his Father wasn't going to let him starve in the wilderness. Jesus didn't hurl himself down from the temple because he knew his Father had already prophesied through the prophet Isaiah that the Messiah would draw to himself people through humble teachings, not miraculous or spectacular events. And Jesus trusted that his Father's way was best. And Jesus refused to worship Satan because he knew that his Father is the rightful sovereign of the universe, and Jesus trusts his Father's sovereignty is best.
Did you catch that part where he says the reason why Jesus didn't hurl himself into the abyss wasn't about Jesus not wanting to test the prophecies, but about Jesus being patient and not wanting to put up a show to get followers? And now we have a dramatization to remind us how we should repair our kingdom halls for free, but only according to the schedule of the governing body.
Thomas, my brother.
Winston, you alright?
Fine. What's going on here?
Just a minute, Winston. It is dusty up there, Winston. And this unit is ancient. But I think I've got it sorted.
Oh.
Yeah, I've measured up so I can price the parts. Should have it working properly in no time.
I see. What was it again? Did the LDC say they were going to provide us with some more direction?
Yeah, they said they would address these needs in the best way possible, but that may take some time. We can solve this now. You know, we just did this. You look away for a minute, and they spring up again.
Gardening, you know, is hard work. It takes time and patience.
Seems like I have little of either lately.
Let me ask you something. When you picture Jesus, what do you see?
A mighty king in heaven.
Yes. On the white horse with his bow in hand. Jesus has the power and the desire to do so much. But he waits until his Father gives the word. He had to wait a long time to become king of God's kingdom. And he still waits to rescue us.
Yeah, you're right.
Jehovah's way is always the best way. It's okay to wait if you're waiting on him. But in the meantime, we always have weeds to pull. The temperature felt good today.
Yes, Winston. This was definitely better than my quick fix.
True, Thomas. The project was a success. But we needed to be patient.
I guess it was worth the wait. You know, Winston, ever since I've known you, you've always been so patient. So come on then, what's your secret?
A lot of practice.
Really? I imagined you were always this way.
I can assure you that is not the case.
Tell me more.
Well, here's the thing about patience.
Let's just recap what we just saw. We saw a guy wanting to fix the AC for free at his Kingdom Hall, and an older guy using soft pressure to wait until the organization intervenes, whenever that may be, because that's Jehovah's way. Because remember, this organization isn't about obeying Jehovah. It's about obeying the governing body, even if that means suffering injustice.
How do we endure injustice? By imitating the patience of Jesus. We don't lie. No deception. We don't insult. We don't threaten. Instead, we trust. We trust that our Heavenly Father, the God of justice, will judge matters righteously in His due time. We're patient.
And this is the narrative that gets used to keep Jehovah's Witnesses from exposing the many, many injustices inside the religion, especially when it comes to CSA cases. Elders are told to not report child abuse to the authorities if they can help it, and to not do anything unless there are any witnesses to the abuse. The only thing they're told to do, and tell parents to do too, is to wait on Jehovah, which basically means do nothing and expect the problem to magically resolve itself. After all, even if there's no justice made in this system of things, the abuser will probably not survive Armageddon, and Armageddon is so close, so all you need to survive is to stay quiet and wait for God to do something. Next up, we have a symposium that starts with a speaker twisting the Bible to make it sound like Abraham and Sarah were patient Jehovah's Witnesses.
But what did Jehovah ask Abraham and Sarah to do? He told them to pack everything up, to leave their home, leave their relatives, and go to a new assignment, and he didn't even tell them where. Now think about it. Jehovah told this to Abraham in a special way. Sarah had to learn it from Abraham. Have you ever wondered how that conversation went? I imagine it went something like this. Abraham comes home excited and he says, Jehovah appeared to me today and gave us a new assignment. We're going to pack up and leave Ur and go to the land. And then Sarah says, well, that's exciting. What land? And he says, well, I don't know yet, but Jehovah's going to show it to us.
Harold Worley just made a video about how Jehovah's Witnesses get indoctrinated in conventions where he touches on what this guy is doing, calling any mission or quest that God gave to a human assignment. Just like Jehovah's Witnesses get an assignment from the religion to work for free preaching, supervising, or cleaning toilets. It's all an assignment from Jehovah, just like Abraham got an assignment too. This, of course, is only cult talk made to make Jehovah's Witnesses feel like they are the direct continuation of what they're reading in the Bible, making them believe that everyone, from Moses to Paul, were pretty much Jehovah's Witnesses who didn't behave the same as modern witnesses. And just like Abraham abandoned everything after God gave him an assignment, Jehovah's Witnesses are taught to leave everything and work for free full-time for the religion.
So Christine, one day back in 2007, you and Kurt were both working full-time. You owned a home, you owned a business, you had cars and financial security. And what did Kurt come home one day and say?
That he wanted to get rid of everything and pioneer.
And what did you say?
Honestly, I laughed, and I asked him if he was serious, but he was very serious.
I'm sure that was a shock. So Kurt, what was going on? What did you do after this response?
Well, once that initial shock wore off, we talked about it, we prayed about it, and we decided to act quickly. Because we knew that if we waited for the perfect circumstances, things would likely never change. So we immediately started simplifying and auxiliary pioneering, and shortly after that, we began regular pioneering. Now our family was focused on spiritual goals.
So what blessings have you experienced as a result of making these changes?
Well, pioneering together has been more enjoyable than we could have ever imagined, and that led to additional blessings. For example, in all of our travels, we've met amazing people throughout the whole branch territory, and they have become part of our spiritual family.
Yeah, and another cherished blessing was that in 2015 we were able to attend SKE, and the school really helped us with our trust and our reliance on Jehovah so that we would be able to have patience for the challenges that would be in our assignments ahead.
That's right, this couple left everything to live a frugal lifestyle dedicated to go and preach. And the best two things they can come up with to say it was all worth it aren't the results of their preaching work, but the fact that they've met people and that they got the chance to go to a Jehovah's Witness school to get more indoctrination. Doesn't it sound worth it?
What's the lesson for us? Jehovah richly rewards his faithful servants so that those who endure patiently under trial will be happy. And that means us too. Trials may seem like they last forever, but trials do come to an end. And very soon, all trials will be coming to an end forever. If we imitate Job and refuse to give up when we're under trial, we too will inherit Jehovah's promises through our patience.
We skipped a very boring speech about Joseph to land on the conclusion for this guy's speech about Job and his conditioning Jehovah's Witnesses the same way we just discussed. It's all about waiting on Jehovah because Armageddon is coming soon. So if your issues don't get resolved during this system of things, they will definitely get resolved after the apocalypse.
In May of 1921, Tulsa, Oklahoma became the site of one of the worst race massacres in United States history.
Hundreds of armed men invaded Greenwood, They beat and killed many black citizens. It was a massacre.
Arthur Klaus was another faithful brother there in Tulsa. When he heard about the violence, he became very concerned about his good friend, Richard Hill, who was living in Greenwood.
So Brother Klaus went to Brother Hill's home to check on him. But Brother Klaus found an armed neighbor protecting his home. He thought that Brother Klaus was another stranger coming there. Brother Klaus immediately identified himself.
He explained that he was a friend of Richard Hill's, and he was looking for him to try to help him. And that's when he was told that many of the black people in that area had been taken to the convention hall.
So Brother Klaus headed back into downtown Tulsa.
The National Guard had been called in and had placed General Barrett in charge, and he decided that no black person could leave the convention hall without a signed order. So Brother Klaus patiently waited to see the general and explained that he just wanted to help his friend. After Brother Klaus agreed to be responsible for the family, the general signed the order.
But then Brother Klaus had to walk through a mob of armed white men to get into the convention hall.
It happened to be the same location that just 2 nights before, Judge Rutherford had delivered the talk, "Millions now living will never die."
But Brother Klaus courageously walked up to the guard, handed him the signed order, and was let in. Now, the auditorium was filled with black people who must have been very puzzled to see a white man. But Brother Klaus calmly walked through the crowd, met Brother Hill and his family, and took them back to their home.
In the auditorium, Brother Klaus overheard people say, "Now look at that. They're the only religious group to go to the general and get a release for their people. You know, we're in the wrong religion, I'm thinking." Brother Klaus showed patience and discernment, and he was able to help a brother in danger.
And in his weekly newspaper column, Brother Hill continued to echo the message of Brother Rutherford's talk that God's kingdom is the solution to all of the world's problems, including mob violence.
This is a ridiculous attempt at rewriting history by not showing you what the doctrine was back then, but instead showing you the example of one individual acting like a friend to his friend. There's nothing extraordinary once you realize what was actually being preached by Jehovah's Witnesses. Just a year before these events, the Golden Age from 1920, the edition of January 7th, page 241, said, even in the case of the human family, if the father or mother are of different races, the children are sometimes unfit for brain work. Clearly and disgustingly suggesting against couples just having children if they were of mixed races. And just a few years later, they will go on to publish the Golden Age of July 24th, 1929, which in the page 702 says, question, is there anything in the Bible that reveals the origin of the Negro? Answer, it is generally believed that the curse which Noah pronounced upon Canaan was the origin of black race. Certain is that when Noah said, "Cursed be Canaan, a servant of servants shall he be unto his brethren," he pictured the future of the colored race. They have been and are a race of servants. There is no servant in the world as good as a good colored servant. And the joy that he gets from rendering faithful service is one of the purest joys there is in the world. This religion has always had outdated practices, and racism was definitely one of them. The fact that some guy was friends with a black man and got him out of a bad situation doesn't change the horrible and clearly undivine theology that Jehovah apparently was okay with up until less than 100 years ago.
What do we know about Zechariah and Elizabeth? Luke 1, 6, and 7 describes them in glowing terms. That's Luke chapter 1, verses 6 and 7. They were both righteous before God, walking blamelessly in accord with all the commandments and legal requirements of Jehovah. But they had no child, because Elizabeth was barren, and they both were well along in years. How must Elizabeth have felt, especially living in a society where having many children was very important?
This is one of the favorite things for Jehovah's Witnesses to do, pretending that anything negative about being an Israelite wasn't because of Jehovah, but because of the culture. You see, it's only because the culture back then was to have children that people felt bad when they couldn't have children. But the culture was obviously led by the Mosaic law, which was given to them by God. Either God made the culture into that, which shows how bad he is at making cultures, or his doctrine wasn't strong enough to go beyond what the culture said, meaning the culture should also be equally important in our days, regardless of what the Bible says. There's no way around it. The Bible clearly has some outdated ideas, and it's the Bible's fault, not the culture back then.
Renee and Irma, you raised two sons who are strong and zealous in the truth. So let me ask you, why and how did you encourage your children to pursue spiritual goals?
As Psalms 127, verse 3, it mentions how sons are blessings to Jehovah. We remember young Samuel and Timothy. We wanted our boys to experience the same blessings as they did. From the very beginning, we encouraged them to pick up full-time service. We helped them to appreciate they did. We would help them financially. We also knew that good association was vital. And so we invited family members of Bethel to our home every weekend. And we also took and were able to take them to Bethel. And they also came to appreciate meeting members of the governing body. And we never missed a meeting.
I personally wanted my sons to understand that serving Jehovah is the best way, and that putting any other pursuit ahead of Jehovah's service was in vain. So I started pioneering as soon as they went to school.
Congratulations. Well, how did training them require patience on your part?
We needed patience with them. Each boy was different, and they all had their own way of thinking. They thought they knew what they were doing, but they didn't. So family worship was a perfect time to explain to them that the world's thoughts were not Jehovah's thoughts. And they had to be careful because the world would take and chew them up like a bubble gum, take the sweetness out of them, make them hard and tasteless, and then just spit them out.
This is how parents are encouraged to indoctrinate their children, both by action and by example. They're taught that the world will only chew them up and spit them out to make them afraid of the world, and to make it so every bad thing that happens in the world reinforces that belief. In reality, it's the religion, the one that will chew you up and spit you out. I was a believing Jehovah's Witness for close to 30 years, and I have nothing to show for it. Go ask any other ex-Jehovah's Witness. They'll likely tell you the same thing.
When my father attended his first meeting as a Bible student, Brother Mankoka was conducting the Watchtower study. Suddenly, the meeting place was raided, and Brother Mankoka became concerned because a good number of those in attendance were Bible students, including my father. Brother Mankoka asked that they release the students, but that did not happen. They beat them up. They beat them up brutally, all the men that were there. In fact, my dad said he thought that he was going to die on that day because the beating was so brutal and he lost a lot of blood. In the face of this situation, Brother Mankoka was concerned. He said a sincere prayer for Jehovah to protect his sheep. And that was what happened. Jehovah protected them. My dad could see that Brother Mankoka was more concerned with them than he was with himself. Brother Mankoka also had the opportunity to help others to get to know the truth. And one of them is my uncle, Philip Cunha. He was in that jail as a political prisoner, and he learned the truth there. And as a result, 4 generations of our family today are Jehovah's Witnesses.
This clip clearly shows why persecuting religions doesn't work and, in fact, only reinforces the religion. Persecuting fanatic religions like this one only validates their doctrine because they're taught they'll be persecuted and they'll never be persecuted like in the end. So the more they get persecuted, the tighter they hold on to their beliefs. And we can see the result right here. 4 generations and counting of people who all thought they were the ones who were going to see the end.
To ask the animals and ask the earth means to consider what creation can teach us about Jehovah. And so in this symposium, we're going to consider what it can teach us about Jehovah's wonderful sense of timing.
This is the start of another symposium where they take random verses of the Bible talking about animals and do David Attenborough style videos, thanking Jehovah for making animals just the way they are today. None of that evolution, it's all static. And here is where the convention gets quite culty, because this symposium is all about how animals teach you to stay isolated and indoctrinated inside the cult, even when you know something is wrong.
We can watch a tiny seed transform into a beautiful plant. But what part do timing and surrounding conditions play in plant growth? During the cold season, seeds and bulbs remain dormant. Later, as temperatures rise and days lengthen, they bloom. Some desert plants practically shut down during long dry periods. When it finally rains, it's their time to grow and flower. Sunflower plants need lots of light. Throughout the day, they turn to follow the sun. After their flowers open, they stop moving and face east all day.
All of this is fine and dandy, teaching you some first grade level biology along the way, but when I watch a documentary, it's not just to hear some random basic facts about botany, it's to see the scientific process in action. Seeing what the intrepid teams of scientists and filmmakers have discovered and discovering it along with them. They try to emulate that by using the same clip twice and by using stock footage that has no relation to each other, interlaced with what your little cousin is learning about animals at school. And then tie it all together with some cult indoctrination at the end.
Jehovah made plants to respond to their environment at the right time. We respond to evidence that these are the last days. And we focus on the source of spiritual light. Jesus said, "Likewise also you, when you see all these things, know that he is near at the doors."
Yes, Jehovah's Witnesses are taught that, just like the plants followed the light of the sun, they should also follow what the governing says, in an analogy that not only makes no sense, but it has no biblical backing. It's all based on a prophecy that Jesus gave to other people. The Jehovah's Witnesses see obeying the governing body as an implicit part of their worship, and something normal that everyone should always encourage others to do. So to them, it will come as no surprise to hear that they need to observe the direction of the governing body like a sunflower follows the sun through the sky. They don't need to prove it. They just need to accept it and move on. And of course, they have the perfect apocalyptical take to go along with it.
Some among God's people are getting sidetracked. This can be seen in the decisions they make about secular work, higher education, the acquisition of material possessions, as well as the amount of time spent in sports and entertainment. Well, these comments in the Watchtower are a timely warning, aren't they? And we all do well to examine ourselves. But it is heartwarming to see that the vast majority of Jehovah's people are focused, and they are using the limited amount of time remaining in this system of things to work hard and to help others come to know Jehovah and gain life.
Every single Christian has ever thought that they lived in the time of the end. And you can easily make a point that all the things prophesied as signs of the end, war, famines, and diseases, have all been prevalent in other times far more than in modern times. Although we definitely still have wars, especially in the Middle East, we live in an otherwise more peaceful world with less diseases and less famines than ever before. Those things still happen, of course, but never at this low rate. So today is when you can least claim that the prophecies are getting fulfilled. Jehovah's Witnesses only claim this because it's a recycled belief from all the way back to the First World War, when these prophecies sounded like they were making sense. Jehovah's Witnesses just never stopped preaching that everything was a sign of the end, even long after every single reason they could possibly list was gone. Instead, you should focus all of your energy on working for free for the religion. This not only encourages Jehovah's Witnesses to exclusively devote themselves into the futile work of trying to convert people, but invites them to examine the conduct of others, because they wouldn't want to be seen associated with spiritually weak people who aren't putting the religion as their priority. Armageddon, soft pressure, and unquestionable obedience towards the governing body? We have already hit cold bingo with the first speech, and we're just getting started. See why I told you this was extremely culty?
Sea creatures. Do they benefit by acting at the right time? These are young salmon. They start life in freshwater. Most species migrate downriver to the ocean to feed and grow. They time the trip around the currents and available food. Later, as adults, they're ready to head back and start the next generation. They wait until river conditions are suitable to migrate upriver. Then, they go. Dolphins, too, perform different activities at different times. There's time to play, to see what's for dinner, and to make friends. But there are times when a dolphin knows to act with urgency. When threatened, the dolphin pod closes ranks to protect everyone, especially the young.
Yet another Attenborough-style video with stock footage mixed with very basic facts about biology. And I bet they'll tie it all together into a cult little bow.
We stay close to one another for safety in a spiritually dangerous world. And no matter how busy we are, we make time to be taught by Jehovah. Look, now is the especially acceptable time. Look, now is the day of salvation.
Yup, just like animals protect each other, Jehovah's Witnesses protect each other by not hanging out with anyone who's not a Jehovah's Witness. Because someone wrote to the Corinthians 2,000 years ago that the time of salvation was back then.
Just like the dolphin in the video who adjusts quickly to their environment, we too learn to adjust quickly to our preaching methods and disciple-making work with changing circumstances in changing world situations. We have seen and experienced this during the pandemic. The question is, why are we so successful in adapting? Because of your faith, our faith. By faith, we fully cooperate with any changes as we serve loyally to the head of the Christian congregation, Jesus Christ, and the appointed faithful and discreet slave of Jehovah.
But Jehovah's Witnesses haven't seen that at all. The preaching method is a very antiquated method of door-to-door canvassing that's basically a vestigial practice from when they used to sell magazine subscriptions and books. Nowadays, with the hours needed to convert one person going up, it has never taken this long to find and convert one single person. Shifting to writing letters did absolutely squat to improve their conversion numbers either. In an era of online cults like QAnon, the Jehovah's Witnesses have proven their failures are attracting new people, and not for the lack of crazy people out there willing to believe, wait, did the speaker just say to serve the governing body?
As we serve loyally to the head of the Christian congregation, Jesus Christ, and the appointed faithful and discreet slave of Jehovah.
Well, I'll be damned. This is the very first time to my recollection that they have directly told you to follow the governing body. The faithful and discreet slave serves others, giving food at the proper time. He does not get served. This cult is being more and more overt in their shift towards a cult of personality, putting the governing body right at the center next to Jesus himself.
The faithful and discreet slave is the primary channel of Jehovah for dispensing increased light or understanding of Jehovah's time and seasons today. We understand that we need to keep pace with God's organization and keep up with new understanding of Bible truths, neither running ahead or falling behind from the one whom Jehovah entrusted that light, the faithful slave.
The notion that you can run ahead of Jehovah's spiritual carriage is ridiculous. Imagine Jehovah's car being so slow that puny humans can run ahead of it. This narrative of keeping up the pace is nowhere in the Bible, but it's needed for the progressive revelation belief. Jehovah's Witnesses take a random verse from the book of Proverbs, which obviously contains a proverb and not a prophecy. They read an out-of-context verse from chapter 4, a chapter where a father is giving his son advice. Verse 14 tells you to avoid the path of the people who do wrong, and verse 15 keeps telling you to avoid that road. Verses 16 and 17 tells you how evil people are, and verse 18 and 19 compares the path of the righteous, which is bright as day, with the path of wickedness, which is dark and easy to stumble. Jehovah's Witnesses read verse 18 exclusively and tell you that the verse is saying that the faithful and discreet slave will have progressive revelations, which is obviously not what the verse says.
Let's read together Proverbs chapter 4, verse 18. Proverbs chapter 4, verse 18. Here it says, "But the path of the righteous is like the bright morning light that grows brighter and brighter until full daylight." Proverbs 4:18 makes it clear that accurate knowledge increases with time. Jehovah reveals the truth gradually, and we must be willing to wait patiently, so that for the light of truth to get brighter and for us to fully understand Jehovah's thinking. When the faithful slave or the governing body realizes that our understanding of certain points of truths needs to be clarified, they do not hesitate to make the needed adjustment. While many denominations of Christendom today make changes to please their church's members and get closer to the world's points of view, the changes made by Jehovah's organization are designed to draw us closer to God and to the pattern of worship established by Jesus Christ. The adjustments we make are driven not by popular demands, not by modern trends, but by the clearer understanding of the Scriptures.
But it's not determined by our clearer understanding of Scriptures. It's determined by whatever 8 guys in New York, or however the number is nowadays, decide the Scriptures should mean. When I was a kid, I thought the governing body was filled with pious men who looked through the Bible constantly, researching and studying so we didn't have to. When you read Crisis of Conscience, you realize that's not the case. They barely consult the Scriptures, and their meetings are mostly about organizational stuff rather than about biblical topics. Of course, they benefit from people thinking they're doing extra Bible study, but their reality is vastly different and would shatter the illusion of truth to most believing Jehovah's Witnesses. But instead, the governing body is pushing the narrative that it's the obedience to them and not faith in Jesus or a strong relationship with God what will end up saving their lives in Armageddon.
At the end of this system of things, our survival may depend on taking timely action. May we always act in harmony with the great timekeeper Jehovah God.
This kind of blind following is completely absent in the Bible, but fits well with the narrative that the governing body has been pushing, saying that right before Armageddon, Jehovah's Witnesses may receive illogical instructions that they will have to follow without question, giving themselves authority that even Jesus didn't claim for himself, as he accepted doubts from his apostles constantly. But Jehovah's Witnesses don't have time to think logically. Instead, they're already busy with their next David Attenborough-style propaganda video.
Jehovah gave birds inherent abilities that enable them to survive in challenging environments. Consider emperor penguins. How do these birds deal with their unique challenges? And what can we learn from their sense of timing? For many birds, the end of the Antarctic summer marks the start of a migration north to milder conditions. But emperor penguins instinctively do the opposite. They head south, moving deeper into the cold to breed. Each female then lays a single egg, which is soon entrusted to the male for safekeeping. These sites are very inhospitable, but the emperors are prepared. Jehovah has given them instinctive wisdom. Before migrating south, these males had feasted and built up their fat reserves. Because for 2 long months, the coldest and darkest of the year, they won't eat and will lose half their body weight while they incubate the eggs. During this time, the females have trekked about 50 miles to the sea and are now ready to return with food, just in time for when the chicks hatch. Preparing ahead for the difficult times helps these penguins to survive, along with their young.
That last sentence is telling. Doing what's right prepares penguins to survive along with their youngs. Want to guess how the video ends?
Now is the time for us to learn from the emperor penguin and build up our spiritual reserves before this world's dark days become even darker. Even the stork in the sky knows its seasons.
And because there's a Bible verse about a stork, you need to make sure that you and your children are indoctrinated so you can survive the end of the world. This really is the most manipulative program I have ever seen. And the made-up lessons just keep coming.
Just as the penguins huddled together for protection from the intense winds, we need to huddle together with our brothers and sisters for protection from Satan's system around us. That means we need to be where our brothers and sisters gather, at the meetings, attending in person if at all possible. Then we can strengthen them by means of our comments and our conversations. When Jehovah's Day comes, we don't want to lose any one of our dear brothers or sisters because they got discouraged and gave up along the way. So right now is the time to encourage them.
More isolationist talk encouraging people to strengthen indoctrination in between cult members, meaning you should also avoid speaking negatively about their religion, because you wouldn't want to be the reason why that person fell out of the truth and didn't make it through Armageddon, would you?
Proverbs chapter 6, beginning with verse 6, we read, "Go to the ant, you lazy one. Observe its ways and become wise. Although it has no commander, officer, or ruler, it prepares its food in the summer, and it gathers its food supplies in the harvest." So what can we learn about the ways of an ant?
Well, given that the verse is talking to a lazy person, we can learn that it's better to be industrious when we prepare for the future rather than lazy. It's a pretty clear verse, but I'm sure they'll find a way to twist it.
Well, it prepares its food, it gathers its food supplies, the verse tells us. But did you notice the interesting aspect with reference to timing? When? Verse 8 says,
in the harvest or at the right time. How does the ant know the right time? Because the Creator knows the right time. And the Creator has endowed the ant with instinctive wisdom so that it carries out all of these tasks, and it does so at the right time. What insight that gives us into Jehovah's timing? What's the lesson that we can learn? Be industrious and act at the right time.
Do you see how they add meanings into the Bible? The Bible is clearly telling you to prepare for the future, but Jehovah's Witnesses twist the verse to make it seem like it's about doing things at the right time. And how would you know if it's the right time? Well, by the governing body telling you so, of course.
Bees work hard, and they have a lot to do. How do bees and other insects get their work done on time? Honeybees are adaptable. They organize their foraging to save time and energy, and to visit flowers when they have plenty of nectar and pollen. The bees' timing works out for all involved. Plants get pollinated, and the bees make honey. This is the sound of cicadas in eastern North America. This variety develops underground for 17 years. Right on time, they emerge by the billions. They'll have just a few weeks to shed their skin and finish the most important work of their life: to find a mate and lay their eggs.
And like always, after giving you very basic facts about biology, they're about to let you know how these bugs teach you to work for free for the cult.
Whether with an adaptable routine like the honeybee, or a fixed one like the cicada, insects instinctively accomplish their work on time. We have an important work to do, and a limited time to do it. With a regular schedule, and by adapting it as needed, we can make wise use of our time. Therefore, the way I'm running is not aimlessly. The way I am aiming my blows is so as not to be striking the air.
And because that verse says that, you need to be as industrious as a bee when it comes to work for free for the organization. See how this is both manipulative and nonsensical? And after the speaker recaps what we just saw in the video, point by point, but in a more boring way, we can finally move on to the last speech and the pretend documentary in this manipulative symposium that's all about mammals and how they too can teach you to follow the governing body.
Land mammals can stay active for long periods, from the large to the not so large. But all of them need some time each day to sleep. African elephants get about 2 hours of sleep per day. Horses sleep for close to 3 hours. A wild sloth might doze for up to 14. And a little brown bat can snooze for nearly 19. But how does sleep help them? Sleep allows the body to recuperate from the day's activities. And some scientists believe that sleep allows their brains to reset and remove toxins, as if giving the brain a good scrub. It may also help to move the day's memories into long-term storage. We humans need sleep too. The younger we are, the more we need.
So, what's the hand-fisted lesson about staying indoctrinated? Well, you can pretend sleep and rest is important if by sleep and rest you mean doing spiritual things that don't go towards your monthly hourly quota.
We're not made to work constantly without sufficient rest and balanced recreation. And unlike animals, We need time to refresh our faith and confidence in Jehovah. Our friendship with Him must always be the most important thing in our life. Make sure of the more important things so that you may be flawless up to the day of Christ.
The verse didn't even have to do anything with the rest. Jesus Christ, this is lazy, but thankfully, that's how this ends. Not with a bang, but with a whimper. And now all we have left is a speech from Gage Flegel, member of the governing body and real name, who has a speech about remaining alert during the end of the world.
Well, what about the end of this system of things? How long have you been waiting? How long have you been waiting? Do you want to know when the end is coming? Me too. But that puts us in good company with Jesus' apostles, Peter, James, John, and Andrew. They asked the same question. When will these things be? What will be the sign of your presence and of the conclusion of the system of things?
This is a pretty self-defeating argument. Ever since Jesus was here, they've been asking about when he would come back. And ever since, people have been thinking they're the ones who will see him return and bring the end, and every single one of them have been wrong. But since Gage brought it up, let's see if his doomsday prophecy holds up to scrutiny.
Concerning that day and hour, nobody knows, neither the angels of the heavens nor the Son, but only the Father. Yes, Jehovah has set the day on his calendar. And as much as we would like to, we can't calculate when the end is going to come, the specific day and hour. Now, you can imagine what was going on in Peter's brain at that moment. Wait, the Son does not know the day or the hour? Wait, Jesus, you're the Son. You don't know the day or the hour? Well, we know that Jesus knows the day and the hour at this time. He is the king of God's kingdom. He knows when he's going to execute Jehovah's judgment on this system of things.
Everything he said was pulled out of his butt, not the Bible.
So what's the first parable? Matthew chapter 25. It's found in verses 1 through 13. Now, 10 virgins were awaiting the bridegroom. We could compare it to a wedding party in current terms. 5 were foolish, 5 were discreet, or wise, as the footnote says. The foolish virgins didn't take any extra oil to keep their lamps burning throughout the night, so they had to go out and buy more. Well, what happened while they were out trying to obtain more oil? The bridegroom arrived, and they lost out completely. Well, by contrast, the discreet virgins brought along extra oil and were prepared when the bridegroom arrived. Well, what does the parable teach us?
Well, the meaning is pretty obvious. Stay on the watch or you may miss out. But since that's the obvious meaning, that's clearly not how the Jehovah's Witnesses want you to interpret it. And they have a short little video to make it sound official.
In the parable of the virgins, the bridegroom is Jesus, and the virgins are his anointed followers. Jesus gave this parable to admonish all his anointed followers in the last days to keep on the watch, lest they miss out on their precious reward.
That's right. According to the Jehovah's Witnesses, this parable is only about the 144,000 people who are going to heaven and are allowed to interpret the Bible. And isn't it narcissistic? And Flegel is about to let you know how he knows we live in the time of the end.
If I were to ask you what convinces you that we're close to the end, how would you respond? For instance, maybe you're thinking of 2 Timothy chapter 3, verses 1 through 5, the characteristics that would mark the last days. And that's true. People have no natural affection. They're without self-control. They're fierce. Road rage is angrier than ever. People have a short fuse and explode with very little provocation. Just recently, my wife Nadia and I were stopped at a red light and observed 2 drivers having a shouting match full of obscenities. We were happy that we weren't in the mix and that neither of them had a gun. But that is becoming commonplace in today's world. What about another evidence that we're living close to the end? We're living in the time period symbolized by the feat of Nebuchadnezzar's dream image, the Anglo-American world power. Other nations may challenge it, but it will not be replaced according to Bible prophecy. That's amazing when we think about it and we look at what's happening on the world scene today. Another evidence, Matthew 24:14. You know those words by heart. The global preaching work is being accomplished. Well, what comes after the good news of the kingdom is preached in all the inhabited earth for a witness to all the nations? And then the end will come. Never before has the preaching work taken such global dimensions, reached into the very corners of the earth.
I know sometimes the fear of Armageddon is hard for some people to let go. So I think it's important for me to let you know that the fact that you see road rage doesn't mean we live in the time of the end. I know, big surprise, right? But also the fact that the United States is a world power doesn't mean we live in the time of the end. And the United States has been arguably losing power since the Cold War. And finally, there have been Christians around the world all the time. But the Jehovah's Witnesses want you to think that it's only about their preaching work, which hasn't reached around the world since they're unheard of in the Middle East and in some parts of Africa.
Well, the master in Jesus' illustration goes away for a time and gives his slaves a fortune with which to do business. To one he gave 5 talents, to another he gave 2 talents, to another he gave just 1. But he was expecting them to work diligently with what they had been entrusted. And why did we say a fortune? Well, the study note indicates that 1 talent would be the equivalent of 20 years' wages for a common laborer. So the slave who received 5 talents essentially received 100 years of wages for a common laborer. A fortune. That illustrates how highly Jesus Christ values the head of the congregation values the preaching activity. Well, what does the master find when he returns? The slave with 5 talents, what did he do? He gained 5 talents more. He doubled the master's belongings. What about the slave with 2 talents who received 2 talents? He also received, he worked and he gained 2 talents more. He doubled the master's belongings. The slave with 1 talent, he buried it in the ground with no results whatsoever. So what is the lesson of the parable for us?
Well, clearly the meaning is that Jesus wanted people to use their God-given gifts in the service of God, even if that meant taking risks. But of course, that's not what the Jehovah's Witnesses believe.
In the parable of the talents, the master is Jesus, and his slaves are his anointed followers. Before Jesus ascended to heaven, he entrusted them with talents, that is, the responsibility to preach and make disciples.
So, according to Jehovah's Witnesses, this parable is also only applicable to anointed people, and it's about preaching. Well, if that's so, then how come every Jehovah's Witnesses preaches seemingly except the governing body? Doesn't that mean that you should only preach if you are an anointed? This really makes absolutely zero sense, and it's just here to make the governing body feel more special. But Gage Flegel will try to explain it away.
So the second parable teaches anointed ones to be diligent in the preaching work. But again, does it apply only to the anointed? No. How do we know that? Well, what does Matthew chapter 28, verses 19 and 20 say? Jesus commanded, "Go and make disciples." Now, Jesus likely gave that commission when he appeared to more than 500 of his disciples, who at that time were not yet Spirit-anointed Christians.
But it still doesn't make sense. Jesus told very specific people to preach about very specific things, like him rising into the heavens. He never made a general invitation for everybody to preach, nor gave a general message to preach. It was more like, you guys go to these towns as my hype man with superpowers to heal the sick ahead of me, so peeps get hype when I arrive. According to their own doctrines, it's still only the anointed ones who should preach.
What is the third parable? Well, when the Son of Man comes in his glory, which is still future, he will separate people just as a shepherd separates sheep from the goats. Sheep on his right hand, goats on his left. Well, what would be the criteria for determining who are like sheep and who are like goats? Essentially, whether or not they support Christ's anointed brothers.
The teaching of the sheep and the goats, which is usually interpreted to be good and help those in need. The Jehovah's Witness interpretation, however, has flip-flopped over the years to mean multiple people, because that's apparently what happens when the light becomes brighter. Let's see what the light shows us today.
In the parable of the sheep and the goats, the shepherd is Jesus, and the sheep are Christians who have the hope of living forever on earth. Those Christians are judged to be sheep because they support the anointed.
That's right. According to the Jehovah's Witnesses, the parable is about whether or not you support the ones in charge of interpreting the Bible. And isn't that convenient? What, did you think the one parable the Jehovah's Witnesses interpret to involve other people besides the anointed wasn't going to be about the anointed? The narcissism of the governing body is extremely overt in this talk, and it's not over yet.
Now, how can we apply the lesson on remaining loyal? In one word, obedience. Obey the faithful slave and those appointed to represent that slave, including elders in the congregation. But why should we obey? Very interestingly, Revelation chapter 14, verse 4 says that the anointed keep following the Lamb, Christ Jesus, no matter where he goes. So if the faithful slave follows the Lamb, then the direction, the guidance that they provide is Bible-based.
That's right. According to Flegel, you should show loyalty to God by obeying men who tell you they follow God and guarantees that's because they can only follow the Bible, when this teaching is absolutely nowhere in the Bible. Nowhere in the Bible does it say that you should follow men rather than God or Jesus. And in fact, you're exhorted to do the opposite in multiple verses of the Bible. This is certainly the most culty talk we have had from a governing body member in a while.
Well, the small group of anointed ones can't possibly complete the preaching work on their own. That's where we need your support. We need your help in this preaching activity. Then there's also the constructing of kingdom halls, assembly halls, places of worship, branch facilities used in Jehovah's service, and also donating to the worldwide work. Here's an experience from Mexico. A little girl we'll call Laura, age 6, lives in Mexico. Sadly, she suffers from epilepsy. And after one particularly difficult hospital visit, her older sister gave her a piggy bank as a gift. During the COVID-19 pandemic, Laura received money from her family to use for school or to buy treats. And what did she do with the money? She decided to save the money in her piggy bank, depositing it there. Well, when in-person meetings resumed, Laura brought her piggy bank to the Kingdom Hall. What did she do with it? After the meeting, she broke it open, counted the money she saved, and it totaled 350 pesos, or about 17 United States dollars. She contributed the entire amount, giving half to support the local congregation and the other half to the worldwide work. Laura explained, "I wanted to donate my savings for our brothers to use and to send more brothers to preach in foreign lands." Think about it. All of this was going through the mind of a 6-year-old. She also asked for another piggy bank, of course, so that she could start saving once again. But that's not all. She's trying to learn to read and write so that she personally can share the good news with others. She can tell others about her loving God, Jehovah. By her actions, that little girl is essentially gathering at Jesus' right hand among the sheep. She's precious to Jehovah. She's precious to Jesus. She's precious to each one of us here in attendance.
This little girl is precious because she donated money to a cult. That's what Flegel is saying in this increasingly culty talk. These examples serve basically to say she donated all her money and she's just a little kid. What's your excuse? It's a form of soft pressure to get Jehovah's Witnesses to donate as much money as possible, using child indoctrination to do so. And now he's about to tell you directly that you should be a sheep.
Don't be a goat. Goats are independent. They're self-serving. At times, they'll even eat garbage. Well, if we want to please Jehovah God and Christ, we need to be sheep-like, humble, loyal, willing to be led by the shepherd. And how do we benefit by remaining loyal? Well, there are benefits now. Loyal obedience brings us joy. That means contentment, security. It brings joy to those taking the lead among us. And what about later? Those who remain loyal to Christ, brothers, will gain something special. Notice what we find Matthew chapter 25, verse 46. There, to conclude the illustration, Jesus said, "These will depart into everlasting cutting off," referring to the goats, "but the righteous ones, the sheep, into everlasting life." What is everlasting life? It's hard to quantify it, what that means. To what might we compare it? It's like the sun rising every morning, constantly there. Everlasting life is just like that. Your life will never end, constant. It's like a mountain stream that never runs dry. It's like the waves lapping on the shore that never stop. Everlasting life goes on and on forever. So your life will prove to be if you demonstrate obedience and loyalty to Christ's brothers.
Flegel just told everyone that in order to gain God's approval and eternal life, they have to follow the governing body like sheep. You didn't mishear. This insulting and infantilizing rhetoric is constantly used to keep the followers docile because you wouldn't want to have independent thinking and worry about your well-being, would you? That's goat-like. And fortunately, that's how this convention program ends. I gotta say, with all of this culty rhetoric of first rewriting Bible passages to say, wait in Jehovah, then a manipulative symposium to get you to blindly follow the governing body like a sunflower follows the sun, and finally with this culty talk about the importance of serving the governing body given to us by a brand new guy from the governing body, this session was intense. If future sessions keep up this culty narrative, we might have the worst convention ever in our hands. But I haven't seen the next session, so if you want to watch them, subscribe and consider supporting me on Patreon like these gorgeous guys. You can also follow me on Instagram and on Twitter. See you on Saturday for the convention.